panel is who I am, who everyone else is. So Els came up with the idea of the panel, and right now, if you are a queer person and you look anywhere on the news, especially if you live in the United States, it can be very depressing, right? It can be scary, it can be challenging, and the goal of this panel is to be a bit of a palate cleanser and to talk a bit about joy. You know, what are the things that have brought us joy in being queer or queer associated or whatever? And you may be wondering, Eugene, you look incredibly straight. Why are you on this panel? Well, I am here to help and to moderate and to maybe learn a few things. But I am I'm the queer adjacent or excellent queer, or I joke sometimes that I am the asterisk on the plus on the LGBTQIA plus. Like, they have to let me in because my husband is trans, and that's been a learning experience for both of us. Because unlike a lot of trans folk, he did not realize this until we were married, until after we were married. And so it was a pretty big learning experience of what does it mean that, okay, you're with this person and they're a new person now, and you have to figure all this stuff out all over again. So I'm very happy to help moderate this. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm gonna have everyone introduce themselves, and I'll just go in the order that I see on Zoom. So Els, do you wanna start us off? You are muted. There you go.
I find the unmuted. I'm Els van Vessem. I live in Europe, in the Netherlands, and I'm now really smiling at Holden. I came up with this panel exactly because of the reason what Eugene mentioned. I am a queer person. I'm a non-binary person. I am dating a trans person. She's sitting next to me, according to Zoom. I'm dating Holden Karau. And so I wanted to bring some joy to our lives. And I work as a data engineer, BI specialist for a local hospital, and I'll be doing the same thing for a governmental organization, a national government organization, in about a month from now. So I'm about to change jobs, and that is basically my background.
Cool. Yeah, next one, Holden. You want to describe yourself?
I'm Holden. I live, despite being next to Els on the computer, physically I am in San Francisco, in America, and I love San Francisco. But I'm also really happy to have met so many wonderful people through the data community, and I want to share some of the joy and happy stories of life, because yeah, there's a lot of not super happy stories. I write open source data analytics software for a glorious employer who can do no wrong, provided they continue to employ me. Let's see here. Yeah, I've been doing it for about a decade. It's all kinds of fun.
Very cool. Randolph, you want to introduce yourself?
Do I want to, or do I have to?
I'm asking you politely. I'll ask very impolitely if you don't get around to it.
My name is Randolph. My pronouns are they, them. I identify as no, but if you do want to label non-binary, and I work for Microsoft on the database docs team, which is part of the larger Microsoft Learn organization, and my current responsibility is SQL Server on Linux content, so I've been writing a lot about command line stuff, and that brings me joy outside of what we're going to talk about today. So yeah, I live in Calgary, which is in Alberta, Canada, and if you ever were a wrestling fan in the 1990s, that is where Bret Hart comes from too. So I've actually directed his brother in a play, which is pretty cool. And I've got a lot of these little fun facts that bring me joy. So yeah, right. On to the next person.
All right, Jules, you want to wrap us up?
Yes, my name is Jules. I'm a SQL database administrator, and I live in Dallas, Texas. My pronouns are she, them, and I identify as non-binary and pansexual. And I also have one queer child and one somehow cis heteronormative straight child who had to come out to me as straight like 3 times.
It happens to a lot of families. You'd be surprised.
Yeah. It's like, we love him anyway, you know. That kind of thing. So it can be a little bit difficult to find queer community and queer joy in a place like Texas.
Right.
So a lot a lot of times if I'm talking to somebody, I'll say, I'm in Texas. They'll say, I'm sorry. But here we are, and we're making the best of it.
Very cool. Okay. So, you know, we talked before this about a couple of different things that bring us joy with this. Is there anything off the top of anyone's heads that they want to go ahead and run with, or otherwise I can go ahead and grab a topic?
The one that stood out to me when we were talking about planning this panel is how how when you're really any kind of marginalized community, it can be especially joyful when you do find your community, when you do find your people, especially when they're rare. And so, finding someone else who's like you, it's like, no, we match, and it can be very exciting. So maybe we can run with some of that.
Yeah, I mean, so how much of that is the fact that you can finally let your hair down? How much of that is the fact that you didn't expect to be able to find someone of similar interest, personality, demographic, however you want to describe it, right? Like, what part is it that's the yay in that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of it to it. I think a lot of it is a kind of relief when you're not, but when you don't feel like a variation upon the default on the human.
Sure.
When we had this kind of ridiculous social construct idea where it's like male, white, straight, kind of middle-aged, educated, able-bodied, all of these markers are thought of as default, and anything that deviates from that is a modification on the default model. That's not true at all.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of human diversity. Yeah, so the idea that decides okay, here's the Mr. Potato Head, and you get the potato, and then you add all the little bits and pieces that change and make it interesting. You talked about the relief. I know when Miles was early on transitioning, I had to do a lot of what I would call pronoun algebra. I had to constantly remember, okay, who knew whether he was in the closet or out of the closet, right?
Yes.
I had to keep track. And I've said I don't like the secondhand smoke of being in the closet. It was uncomfortable, and I do not want to go back to that. And there's a relief at a certain point if you're coming out, where for the most part you don't have to do that anymore. Now, if the cable guy comes or the yard guy comes, I still tell him I have a wife, right? Because he doesn't need to know. And so there's still times where it's difficult, but just being in a place where it's okay, I can relax. I don't have to think. I don't have to do this constant math problem in my head anymore. That can be really nice.
Yes.
That acceptance is extremely important for a community, and that community can be 2 or 3 people, or it could be, for example, I've joined a gay choir. Actually, we're straight friendly. We do allow straight people, but it's a great way to let off steam, because choir is a great way to just enjoy yourself without having to worry about your life. And you also get to be with people who may not be exactly like you, but accept you for who you are, and don't have any judgments based on what everybody else out there, the default setting, is judging you on. I mean, everybody's going to judge you for something, especially with me and my accent. I get it. I understand it. But in that community, that acceptance is gold. That's why I go to these things. That's the main reason.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because today I spoke about this with Catherine, who had this amazing talk for me this afternoon, for most of you this morning, because I met Catherine about 6 years ago at a data event where she was a speaker, and I was so surprised about how approachable and how kind she was, and we had this really lovely conversation, and it made me realize that people who are not men can also talk at events, which I knew, of course. I've always been a feminist, but seeing it happen and that really like solidified everything for me. And that really transitions nicely in when I'm at Holden, because I think we met about 3.5 years ago at a conference in Amsterdam where Holden was a keynote and some other people were as well. And I think out of the 4 keynote speakers, 3 of them were trans women. Or I think women. And the other person was a Black woman. And then 3, and I think, no, well, this is hard, but there was like a whole range of diversity going on.
Right.
And because I tweet a lot at conferences usually, Liz, one of the other keynote speakers, DM'd me, was like, hey, do you want to have lunch with some cool people? And I was like, yeah, sure, I want to have lunch. I mean, I'm here anyway. So that's how I met Holden. And I felt so at home immediately with them because they were queer and they were trans and they were me. Well, they were not me, but they were like, I could relate to them, and I knew that people like me can also do all those cool things that you usually only see like white cishet men do. And the really, like, the thing I found the most funny is when Holden gave her talk on how to contribute to open source projects, which was really cool, and I still really haven't, even though I really like the idea. I basically sent some friends of mine a photo like, look at her, she's so cool, I want to be her friend.
Right.
Well, that worked.
Sure.
Yeah, so finding people that like look like you and are in similar demographics as you, like it blew my mind and made me feel so much more welcome in the rest of the tech community as well, because I knew there were people like me in it.
Right. It helps normalize things. So both having like a community like of like people to be in, but also seeing them doing these achievements, doing these things. And like you might think Eugene Meidinger, white, cis, male, doesn't have any representation problems, but one of my heroes is Scott Hanselman because he's a diabetic, right? And so I'm a type 1 diabetic. And when I first got diagnosed, you know, it's not the same as coming out or any of that kind of stuff, but I thought my life was over. Right, because the thing was there was this medical condition that would make life difficult, and to see these people like him up on stage and he'll drink orange juice if he has to, or prick his fingers if he has to, you know, it reminds you like I can do that too, right? So, Holden, what experience have you had with like finding community and connecting and seeing other people like yourself in the community?
Yeah, I mean, so there's the data community where obviously I've met some amazing, wonderful folks, and that's fantastic. Even in places, I think one of the things that someone else mentioned was meeting that community in places where you're not expecting to meet that community is like adds an extra level of joy. And so like meeting that community in places where it's more challenging for them to necessarily be out can be really nice. Like I was doing a motorcycle ride through California with some folks, and we like stopped in this, I don't know if you have the chain Denny's, but let's say like not okay, cool. So moderately
I do in Pennsylvania. I don't think it's a global brand.
Yeah. I mean, I know it's in Japan. I don't know if they made it to Europe. I know it's in Japan and they still allow smoking in Japan, but that's another story. But like, yeah, in like this middle of nowhere's Denny's, just going in, and then like all of the staff was queer, and we were like not expecting it at all. And they were all also like queer, but like not like super, how do I say this? Like not super biz. And they were just like, oh, it's so nice to see like other folks who are just like queer and like super visible about it. And I was just like, oh, this like happy feel. And like there's Pride in San Francisco, and like I organized like it used to be a scooter club that accidentally became a motorcycle club. And it's
I think that she muted herself. We're good. Good.
Yeah, it started out like I have a bunch of like bad transition jokes around like the scooter club becoming a motorcycle club, because you know you got to make jokes that you're not yourself, otherwise you know someone else will. But and just like having that community and finding out that there's like a whole bunch of other trans queer dykes who like ride bikes and just like are incredibly badass. And it's really awesome to meet these people and have that community and like, you know, helping. The other part is like, I think about this movie, and I feel bad for referencing a movie, but like there's this movie about pride in England, and I don't know how historically accurate it is because written. But one of the lines in it was like when you're in a fight against someone else and you find that you have an ally that you didn't know of, that's the greatest feeling in the world. And I feel like there's some of that in this world right now, where there's a lot of things that are pushing down on the queer community. And so when you find out that the community is larger, or you have more people who are there sticking up for you, right? Like that feels so great, and it lifts a little weight off of the daily pressure that exists. And so it makes me really happy. And also, if anyone is in San Francisco and wants to ride motorcycles, like I am not hard to find. I will admit you can't locate me by my hair in San Francisco like you can at data events, but you can find me on the internet. You can ride motorcycles.
Amazing. I think that movie was the coal mining movie that you're referencing.
Yeah.
That was pretty accurate. That was pretty accurate, yeah.
Okay, cool. I really liked it. Oh, also, yeah, I forgot you're from Canada.
Yeah. Well, South Africa and Canada, yes.
If people haven't seen the movie Pride, I think it's actually called Pride. Do go watch it. It's amazing. They're also still active on Twitter, that organization.
Cool.
So follow them. It's cool.
Yeah, I mean, so it sounds like, well, I'm hearing a couple different things of how this brings joy. I think one is whenever this is treated by society as this abnormality, it's nice to find it in the mundane, right? Like you're just at a restaurant and there's people just being people, and it's beyond normal in a sense, right? And so it sounds like there's something refreshing from that, but also just the fact that I think, I mean, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's an unfortunate fact that because queer folks are so often persecuted because of their orientation and preferences and all that stuff, it becomes this box that they get put in of like, this is what defines you. And like one of the things that's frustrating for me is having to think, okay, do I need to correct someone? It's like, they don't need to know this. I don't need to be defined based on like these preferences. Like I would like to be defined by the fact that I have like 100 board games in my basement, right? And so it sounds like it's nice whenever the focus of your life and how you connect with people who are like you can be these other things, whether it's choir or bikes or Jules, I think you raised chickens. Do you have any chicken friends?
Let me tell you, the pipeline from like straight woman without chickens to queer woman with chickens.
Sure.
There's a lot more people to go that way than you think. It's like people like,
it's a gateway drug.
I think I like girls and I'm going to get chickens. It's like they go together.
Chicks, not yeah.
Yeah.
All the chicks.
Common confusion.
How to pick up chicks. Book.
Josh says that they also identify as a shelf full of European board games. So I'm glad to find some shared community there.
I don't have 100 in my basement. I have 40 in a cabinet just over there, mainly because the basement is full of car stuff. So yeah, that's I think there might be a trend that we're spotting here. And this is actually segues nicely into what I wanted to talk about, and that's to see regular people who you find out after the fact are queer or identify as part of the rainbow spectrum, as I like to call it, because there's a lot of letters to remember, and you have to remember the right order they're in, which is why I like the word queer. Especially in Canada, because you have to put Two-Spirit first, and that makes sense. So if you don't know what Two-Spirit is, it's a First Nation term for people with different gender expression and identity than Western people. So I'm certainly not qualified to speak on that very much, except to say it does go first, and that's correct. But I have many, many board games. I've got many, many books. I cannot speak for everyone else here, but I think reading is one of the greatest things that have allowed me to explore different experiences without having to navigate social difficulties. Because I guess if you didn't know, you weren't paying attention, but I am autistic and I'm not very good in social settings, and I need to leave the room if it gets too noisy or too bright or too loud. And so, yeah, reading helped me a lot to figure out what was going on with myself when I was growing up, and that brought me joy to see what a huge community there was online. I found a lot of new friends who I'm still friends with 20 plus years later through internet chat, through Tumblr. I learned a lot on Tumblr, let me tell you, even after they took away the pictures. There's a lot of joy in realizing that you're not alone, and that we keep coming back to community. I wasn't expecting that to be the theme, but it seems to be the theme, and that community can take any form. So when I see people succeeding, when I see people who are doing well, and I find out that they're queer or queer adjacent, that brings me even more joy, because it means they are living their best life without worrying about this label or labels or lack thereof.
I agree with that. And recently I had to, this is going to sound like a segue, but it's really not. I recently had to move my horse that I owned from one stable to another. And I was really upset about it because everyone was really accepting at the stable that I'd been at. And I talked to like several different stables. You know, you kind of feel them out. I'm like, what do you think about? And the stable that I ended up going with, I mentioned to them, so you know, this is kind of what my family is like, and you know, where our values are. And they were like, oh, we've got everybody. You know, it's like this is like a rainbow ranch out here. It's like, I should be here. And it's fabulous to find that, you know, again, in an unexpected place.
That makes a lot of sense. Randolph, you're muted if you were trying to say something.
I was just commenting on your funny comment in the comments. So.
Oh yeah, I saw only the host and panelists can see it, but there was a comedian who talked about like this quote he heard, like, I never would have gone to college if it weren't for that horse, and then just ruminating on what that could have meant, like how that could have been. I feel like that was somehow related. You know, a related topic. I'd be interested in what people think, but something that I learned is being queer adjacent and watching my husband transition. You know, I had to learn to advocate for him and be like, all right, the Chipotle's app says your name is, you know, Annie, and we're fixing that today. We're not letting a Chipotle app detonate you. We're not letting Alexa detonate you, whatever. And like when you're queer adjacent and you're trying to encourage someone, you're trying to be an ally, whatever, you're like, you need to be your true authentic self. And then you try to avoid eye contact with a mirror because you realize that maybe, you know, you yourself are not doing that, right? So like what has like learning to be authentic been like for all of you, or helping someone else learn to be authentic? Like what has that been for you?
I can see this from both sides, because about time is difficult. I think about 10 years ago, I started dating a wonderful person, and she realized she was a girl. So that's a very similar experience to what Eugene mentioned. And due to her realizing she was a girl and transitioning, I realized I wasn't, which was very interesting and very joyful in the end. The fact that she was trans and etc. was never an issue, and the fact that I was also some flavor of not cis and not trans was also never an issue between us. But it was very interesting to realize, and I now see it with one of my other partners. I'm also polyamorous, so I have two partners, and I have a boyfriend who used to identify as sort of heterosexual-ish, but he's dating me, and I'm a non-binary person, and he's advocating for me so much. Like, he gets angrier about transphobia than I get sometimes. Which is very good, and it means that if people are shits on the internet, I can link it to him and he'll go yell at them for me if I don't feel like yelling. And so that's always very amazing to have someone advocate for you is a very, very good thing. And also seeing him realize that he is not really hetero, he's more queer, but can he call himself queer? Because that's also sometimes a loaded term, and there's lots of stuff associated with that, and like people died for it, so can you call yourself queer? But in the end he does now identify as queer because he feels that he's also rejecting the heteronormativity of the society, and he's dating me, and he's dated other non-binary people in the past as well. So calling himself hetero is also invalidating my and the other's experience. And it's really amazing to see someone indeed become, in this case, his more authentic self and feeling more secure in that and everything. It makes me very happy.
I think anything that makes us kind of sit back and take stock of ourselves and interrogate our inner selves, that's always valuable. Whether we come to the conclusion of like, oh, I really am straight. I don't know what that experience is like, but you can do it. It's the interrogation is valuable, and the insight that you come out of it about yourself is valuable.
Real quick, Jules, Megan has a question. Speaking of authentic selves, she needs to know if you've read Under the Hen Floats: Inside the World of Backyard Chickens and People Who Love Them.
I've ordered that book. It's not here yet.
Okay. Awesome.
Hey, I remember one of my colleagues, so early on when I was still figuring out my vibes and where I was at, one of my colleagues who is cisgender, I was a few, maybe a year into it, was just watching you transition has made me realize that I don't need to do a lot of the things that I used to do because they weren't really part of who I was, and that was kind of neat to hear her talk about how in many ways I was picking up many of the things that she was no longer doing, but how she's just oh yeah, those things are not for me, and that is a conscious choice that I get to make in this world. I don't have to follow the path that is laid out. So I think there's something to be said for having people around you break the mold, and then having that be oh yeah, okay, I don't have to follow what society says. And
yes,
I also remember.
Go ahead. I thought you were done.
I was just gonna say, I also remember the first time that I met someone who was trans and did software development, and I was oh, I don't have to turn to one of the two stereotypical professions that television portrays for that. So maybe I can be a programmer and be trans, and that's less of a thing nowadays because it's much more much more common. But I think yeah.
To my absolute delight, I've seen a lot of cis and or hetero people be kind of queer adjacent, like Eugene is, and use that interrogation to eliminate sources of stress for themselves, to break down toxic masculinity or toxic femininity, by saying oh, I don't have to hide all of my emotions just because
right.
I don't have to shave my legs and wear makeup every day because I'm a woman, and it just makes me giddy seeing people kind of realize these things about themselves and about gender roles, and that's just fantastic. A fantastic part of your interrogation.
And it's difficult, right? Because I think for me, again, queer adjacent or whatever you want to call it, one of the challenges is there's parts of your gender role that you might like. There are parts of things that society gives you that you might like a lot, right? So for me, I really like the idea of being a breadwinner and a protector and a provider because my love language is acts of service, right? And so when this first started to happen, it felt okay, do I have to reduce everything to just pronouns and body parts? And you realize, no, it's much more nuanced. It's figuring out, okay, what's your favorite dish and what ingredients do you want, as opposed to being all right, we just have to throw everything out, right? Randolph, was there anything you wanted to add?
I am going to talk about the little things that bring me joy, which is tangentially related to what you were saying.
Go for it.
The little things are when you don't know somebody, you're meeting them for the first time, and they use the correct pronouns that you have advertised. And that goes for people who don't consider themselves queer or have different pronouns. I'm talking about everybody. It's those little things, those little acts of kindness that human beings generally are very good at. And if it wasn't for some training in their own communities to the opposite, human beings are generally very nice people. And I like it when that happens. I like it when somebody says, how's your partner? Because I wasn't sure how you describe your home life, and I didn't want to offend you. It's like little things like that are thoughtful. It's the thoughtfulness behind them that counts, and that gives me anyway permission to forgive them if they slip up from time to time. I slip up from time to time with pronouns because for 40 mumble years I wasn't sure what was going on in the world, and so I still slip up because of old habits, and I'm more willing to forgive that kind of thing if somebody is making an effort in other ways. And I just wanted to say thank you to those people, and it's most of you, who do make an effort just to make people feel a little bit more accepted for who they are and what they represent.
There's also a joy in catching people and being attentive and thoughtful, because I talked about that pronoun algebra. So there was a long while where I referred to having a spouse and say they and them and never specify. And it was always funny to watch. Like, most people would just go to that default, that Mr. Potato Head default, but occasionally there would be the people that would mimic the language I was using. Like, you were paying attention. Well done. Good job, Watson. You've done it.
Okay.
Just an amusing anecdote. In South Africa, when they changed the law in 2006 to allow people who are not straight, I was going to say straight and white, but that was in the 60s and 70s. Anyway, South Africa was not a great place to grow up unless you were straight and white. They changed the law in 2006 to say anybody could get married, and instead of changing the marriage law, they introduced a civil union law, and then anybody could use either one of those things. They made them basically the same thing. And on the civil union certificate, it actually says spouse A and spouse B. So for the longest time, I joked that I was spouse B because I am. And it just worked out that way that I just like being spouse B by default. And I refer to my husband as my spouse. And I enjoy people's reactions when they find out that he is in fact a dude. I love it. I love that. That brings me joy too, even if it's maybe not
right. A little bit of Schadenfreude with the Freud there, but yeah. That's funny.
I had this interesting thing. I have coworkers. What a shock. Now I have coworkers, and I get misgendered at work a lot.
Sure.
That's been a whole thing. I didn't want to talk about it because we're going to talk about joy. But a little while ago, he said, and that's also a Dutch thing, but he said, "Oh, hey, friend, Els." But in Dutch, we have very gendered word for friend. We have vriend and vriendin. Friend is the male, vriend is the male part, vriendin is the female counterpart. And then you saw his brain go, "Oh, wait, but what would be the word for a non-binary friend?" And I was like, yeah, that is indeed an issue. But the fact that he caught that and was like, was very, very joyful for me. Especially because I've not always felt accepted as non-binary in that workplace. Because of the whole misgendering thing. And yeah, that was very interesting. And there is no good Dutch version because our words for friend are so gendered. I tend to say MB friend because of I don't know, if we mention gender, let's mention gender in how we use the language. But that was very, very nice.
Right, getting to see the gears turning.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome. I think we've got about another 20 minutes. Feel free to post questions if anyone has them, but otherwise, does anyone have any other just little moments of joy like Randolph's that comes to mind?
The one that comes to mind for me right now is seeing the younger generation find these joys because they are so much more in tune with this stuff than I ever was, until I really got on the internet. But they're emotionally intelligent, they know the lingo, and they know how to be polite, they know how to be kind in ways that we sure never did 20 years ago. And that is magnificent. And seeing them be joyful and playful with it can be a lot of fun. Like I was leading the younger queer child on a horse once, and I told them, all right, sit up straight, and they said, I can't do anything straight, I'm too gay. I was like, as you will, please balance yourself on this. And I've seen, like I've watched kids go from like being little bitty and like you can kind of clock them, when they're little. Like I bet that one is I bet that one that turns out queer later. And you watch the little girls in middle school get the undercuts and play clarinet. Like, yeah, you're going that way. Good job. And and watching them evolve and make these realizations themselves so much sooner and with so much more care and compassion than older generations did. It's magnificent. The kids are all right.
Kids are all right.
The kids are all right. Yeah.
I have a niece, and she's 25 now, and I think I came out to her as non-binary, like, relatively. I think she might have been the first in my family. And when we were gonna meet for Christmas, that's been like a few years after, she basically asked, like, hey, pronoun wise, what do you want? Because are you out to the rest of the family? And I was like, yeah, I don't, with my family, I tend to not like require they them pronouns or Dutch they them pronouns, but I do prefer them. And she was like, oh, but then me and my boyfriend will definitely try, etc. She was so kind and so lovely. And my mom, who, like, older people can get it too, which is amazing sometimes. My mom recently read the book Genderqueer, the graphic novel, and I forgot the name of the author. I didn't point it out to her. She read it by herself. She was very, very positive about it and was like, everyone should read this. And is correcting herself when she says daughter. She will like, oh no, child, when she refers to me, which is very, very happy, very, very good. And she's older. She's a second-grade feminist, so it's always a bit like gender stuff can be hard to bring up, but I'm so glad that they're picking it up.
There's a cute little story that about my mother speaking of parents. My father died a long time ago, so that's why I don't speak about him, not because anything else. My mom came to visit us in Canada here before the pandemic, and I was sitting working at my desk, which is the dining room table, and she said, Randolph, what does cis mean? And I said, it means somebody who identifies as the gender they were born as. And she said, so I'm cis? And I said, yes. And she says, okay, cool. And off she goes. And then a few hours later it was dinner time, and she said, Randolph, they, them, it's dinner time. And that was that. That was me coming out to my mother, because she follows me on Twitter. In 1990 Mumble, it was a lot more difficult to come out to her then, because we didn't have the language that we do now for expressing these things, these feelings, these ideas. And I do put a lot of things in the internet and Tumblr specifically for coming up with words. Some of them are impossible to remember, but some of them have helped. Well, I consider myself an older person now anyway, but especially people like my mom who doesn't know what these words are, but now that we have the vocabulary, it brings me joy that we can have a conversation in 2 sentences as opposed to a very long and drawn out email thread in 1996. So yes, that brings me joy to the new vocabulary that we have and that my mother is accepting. So
absolutely, yeah. I tried to have that conversation with my dad like 15, 20 years ago. And I, went through a lot of explaining, a lot of trying to get some vocabulary into him, and he finally said, "You're just a woman without the lame parts." It's like, all right, if that's how you want to take it, then fine. Progress. All we want is progress.
Right. Well, it's funny too, because I think some folks have gone through their own version of this. Like my mom used to be called Carly and then changed her name to Carlin, and now this, when she got older, changed her name to Angel. I don't know why. And it's funny, I joke that the closest thing I understand to dead naming is my mom. She's older, she has mental illness. When I was a kid, she would call me by my sibling's name occasionally, and I would be furious, just utter rage, right? And so that's probably the closest I can understand what that must be like. But I think people have lived experiences that are similar in their own way, and even if they're older, there's ways to connect with that. James Ward had a question. Is there an experience you had that made you feel comfortable being your authentic self at work?
I had at this job, my boss's boss, at the time, roles have reshuffled, of course, told me about her family and sort of like how it was structured, and then also was very clear, like, hey, if people are going to give you difficulty, because it's not perfect, right? No company is perfect, and you don't have the energy for that, you can just send them to me. I will have a conversation with them. You don't have to worry about it. And I was a very okay, yeah, I can just be me. It's okay. And if there are problems, it's not exclusively on me to deal with it. And earlier, at another company, I had another boss who we had peer review feedback, and I got peer review feedback with the wrong pronouns. He was just like, "Hey, I don't know how to fix this, but I will. I promise I'm going to work on this." That was very much oh, okay, cool. There are other people who are going to do some of the work. So I have to do some of the work myself. That made me feel really comfortable. It's supposed to be things. Made me feel comfortable in being who I am in that work.
When I had my old job, which is now, I think it's now about 4 years ago, I came out as non-binary and asked for folks to use gender neutral pronouns for me, like the Dutch version, which is even more controversial than the English version. And my manager at the time was a white cis-het dude, and it was a bit, I was a bit scared to mention it to him, because I thought it would be respectful, but I was also afraid to be able to have to deal with grammar and issues and blah, and why are you making it so difficult? And he was really, really kind, and I actually, in the conversation we had about it, I tried to track back, because I also don't want to make problems for people. And then he actually said, "Yeah, but you just told me it really feels grating when people use she, her for you. So we need to make sure you're comfortable here. So we're gonna do this." He was actually so actively supporting me, which was amazing. And I think after about 6 months, he said something like, "Yeah, it took a while to get used to, but now even when I talk to you about you to my wife, well, not that happens regularly, but it came up, I will rephrase it or use your name, etc., etc." So that was very, very nice, the fact that I was so actively supported in coming out. And everyone was very cool at that company, and I was in a team of just dudes, I think about 20 other dudes. So that was very good and very nice, and no one was weird about it.
I can echo that. Where I work now, it's a very, very, very large company. It's the size of a small country, and the organization has made a lot of effort to make people feel welcome internally. We have ways to express our pronouns in our Teams identity and email and all that kind of stuff. And although I still find people, especially people who don't speak English as a first language, slipping up quite frequently for many of the reasons we've already spoken about with Vriend and Vrienden, which is the same in Afrikaans. There are a lot of people who are allowing me to be my authentic self, because it's just me. My authentic self is whoever I try to be at any given day, without trying to be dismissive of the question. Most of my experiences in my job make me feel comfortable being my authentic self because the company is set up in a way to do its best to embrace that, to make people bring their authentic selves so that they can do their best work.
I love that. And there's something about IT that especially I think kind of brings that out of people. Like there are some parts of like finance and corporate work that, you know, it's not as acceptable to be more authentic and more personal at work, you know, because it's almost seen as unprofessional, which I think is incorrect. But perhaps it's because of the higher ratio of neurodiverse people in IT that ends up encouraging that attitude of letting people be their authentic selves at work. I think that's great.
Sorry about that. I think there's two pieces of that. I think there's higher rates of neurodiversity in IT, but also just more non-traditional career paths, right? There's more people who are just into computers. They worked one shift on a help desk and suddenly they're an IT person, right? And so it's just the island of misfit toys in general. Like I went into IT because I was not good with people. And then I found out the business half of business intelligence meant you had to talk with people, unfortunately. I think another thing to answer James' question that can help with being your authentic self is the support structure you have outside of work, right? So my first big job outside of work, there were three things that I thought would get me fired. Depression, because I was worried they think I couldn't do my job. Diabetes, because I'm expensive and I thought they were worried I couldn't do my job. And live action role playing, because it's weird. I kid you not, right? And I remember there was one day at work, I was listening to a conversation by a staffer where someone lost a potential job because they were a furry on Facebook, right? Because the employer had found out that, okay, they were, I know, Randolph, they found out like, okay, this person's into this thing that to me is odd. And so we're just not gonna do it. And so like, you can imagine me being like, oh God, I need no one to know that I do live action role playing, that I hit people with foam swords out in the woods, right? And as I started to, you know, make courses and have my own streams and come and then work for myself, as people say, I had fewer F's to give, right? And so I was more comfortable being my authentic self because I was less worried I would get fired. And so if you have friends in the community, them knowing that they can reach out to you when they need to try to find a new job or do whatever, or that they have connections, can help them be more authentic inside of work because they know that they have more of a safety net outside of work, right?
There's something really magnificent about feeling safe, feeling secure, especially when you're part of a marginalized community.
Did anyone else have any other questions? We've got about seven more minutes.
Let's just sing a song together. We'll do a round.
Oh, jeez.
Oh
It
no.
won't be terrible because of the delay. It'll be fabulous.
It's by Maya Kobabe. And there's an Amazon link in the questions that I'm not sure if other people can see.
I think they
Sometimes-
can.
I think they can. My mom recommends it. I still have to read it.
That's funny.
I really like trans bodies,
Okay.
I was just gonna add another book. I really like Trans Bodies, Trans Self. I think that's what it's called.
Just
Yeah.
hold on.
I recently read a book called this book is, oh, no, not this one. It's by the same author. Let me just figure out. Juno Dawson is the author, and the book is called What's the Tea, which is about trans people. They originally wrote a book called This Book is Gay before they transitioned, and then the follow-up is What's the Tea, which is about trans folks. And it's targeted towards younger people and caregivers of younger people who are thinking about transitioning. So the language might not be up everybody's street, but it was quite interesting because it tries to be, it tries to give as much information as it can in the most accessible way. And it's written by an English person, so there is a little bit of a cultural influence there, but it's pretty good. I would recommend that too.
The title does remind me of a piece of joy. So I play a card game called Magic the Gathering, and at least the store I go to, there's a disproportionate number of queer players, right? And so someone was talking about tea and progesterone, and I was like, I know what this is about. So I felt like a clever insider. So that was joyful.
I'm actually part of a queer book group, and we only read books from trans and queer authors. And there's so many books. The only problem sometimes, if the books are about like trans issues or like trans characters, there's usually also a lot of transphobia in the book because that's something people encounter. So finding books that actually bring a lot of joy is sometimes a bit hard. But this month we're reading Mooncakes, which is a graphic novel which is very, very joyful. So I'm very happy about that. I already read it, but I have to reread it now.
I don't remember sorry, who was speaking?
Oh, I was going to say, I never considered graphic novels as a way to learn about this stuff, which is just kind of funny.
I was going to say, I don't remember the title, but I read a series of 6 Japanese manga books about trans and non-binary people. It was translated into English because I don't read Japanese, and I think something was lost in the translation. But it was a good storyline anyway, and I did enjoy the attempt to bring this conversation into a culture that I know has had some issues understanding queer people in the past and the present.
If you find the title, could you please link it to me?
I'm going to ask the person who lent me the books to see if they remember, because I think it's worth sharing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. I think we're getting close to time. So does everyone have final thoughts? I'll start with you, Els, if you have anything.
This was lovely.
Good.
Yay, queerness in the data community. Yay for this panel and this conference, which brings a lot of joy in finding the community that we mentioned multiple times, finding people that are like you in many different ways that you might not expect. That was my final thoughts.
Good. Holden, do you have any final thoughts?
I mean, copy paste of the last one. I love this community, and I'm really happy that there is such an accepting community that we can be a part of. So yeah.
Very cool. Randolph, any final thoughts?
There's a lot of good out there. There are a lot of good people out there who don't speak up as much as the loud people. I heard a really good, what is the word, a phrase when I was growing up. I don't remember who originally said it. It's probably very old, which is an empty vessel makes the most noise. A lot of the loudest people on the internet are also the emptiest, and there are decent regular people out there who accept you for who you are. They may just not understand, and it's a bit of a two-way street in that for them to understand us, we have to understand them. We might have to explain things. There's no excuse for willful ignorance, but ignorance itself can be counteracted by a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of grace. So, and it goes both ways. So I appreciate all the people out there who do make an effort and aren't very loud about it. Those are my favorite people because they don't have to make a scene about how much wonderful things that they're doing. And thank you for that. I appreciate you.
Jules?
Well, I know it's said, by Dr. Martin Luther King that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And I think part of what we see when that arc bends towards justice is more joy, because it's hard to be joyful when you feel cheated, when you feel excluded, but when queer people see justice, and individually and as a society, I think it frees us up to be more joyful about it. And so I am so hopeful that remains true, and that the more joy we see in the queer community, the more that's an indicator that things are going the right way for us.
Very cool. Looks like Randolph was able to post the manga series is Love Me for Who I Am by Kata Konayama. And my final thoughts is it was really cool to be able to help with this and to hear a pretty wide variety of lived experiences. And so thank you for everyone who made this possible.
Everybody is